is an American feminist. She has written extensively about various aspects of feminism. She is known to be a liberal feminist. There are feminists of all brands, and there are feminists of all combinations and permutation. So, when we talk about a particular essay or an article written by a feminist, we also take care to see which particular brand of feminism that feminist belongs to. She is a feminist from US, and she is a white feminist. And because of the fact that she is a white feminist, and also because she has always espoused a particular brand of feminism, there has been a considerable body of criticism made against Elaine Showalter. Black feminist thinkers in US have come heavily upon Elaine Showalter for totalizing a white woman's experience. Totalization is a process by which you tend to generalize your own personal experiences. You convince yourself that your experiences, your worldview, your unique upbringing, your understanding of the world, all these things are same, and everyone in the world shares these experiences and emotions. So what you do when you totalize is, if you try to the world from the eyes of a white woman, you would be blind to the trauma, the pain, the hardships, exploiting, and a number of other pleasant aspects of life have always been part of the experiences of the suppressed groups. Always remember this. Keep your hello. Can you hear me? All of you? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, all of you. Okay, good. So show your faces, but mute your microphone. Yeah. Good. So what in this particular essay, Ellen Showalter is talking about the need for first constructing a new form of aesthetics for feminists or new form of poetics for reading the texts produced by men and new form of poetics which would provide guidelines as to how to read and understand literary works produced by women. So what is she talking about? She is trying to talk about the kind of poetics feminism requires, feminist writing requires. So this is specifically about how you try to deal with your cultural experiences, how you as women try to deal with your cultural experiences, how you try to understand your cultural texts, your cultural texts. Kavya as yeah, yes. Now, so she realizes that there is absence of a unique and separate poetics for women's writing. Now there is a complex question which we need to deal with before we go ahead with this particular essay. What is this complex issue? What is this very seemingly insoluble issue we have been trying to resolve? It is very simple. When you go to a literary text, do you go to it either as a man or as a woman? Does your gender influence your reading? Whether you are a man or a woman is very important for reading literary texts, understanding them, and also remember generating interpretations. You do not go to cultural texts as transcendental humans, somebody who does not belong to this world, or somebody who does not belong to this spatio-temporal world. All of us belong to certain places, all of us belong to certain ages. We also are embedded deeply in our society. So given these factors, is it possible for us to approach cultural texts without being influenced by either our class or our gender? Is there a transcendental reader, somebody who can read a literary text from above, in the sense that somebody who reads a literary text the same way. It does not really matter which text he is reading when that particular text in question was produced, who produced it, and the age to which the reader himself belongs. Now, it is important for you to understand this. Feminists have asked this question an umpteen number of times. Is there a gendered writing? What we mean by gendered writing? Is it possible for me to make out the gender of the writer who has produced a piece of literature? When I read a poem, is it possible for me to find out the gender of the poet through the language used by that particular poet, the kind of expressions used by that particular writer, the kind of imagery, metaphors, the kind of a symbolism the poet employs? Would it be possible for me to make out the gender of the poet? It may seem impossible because we believe that language itself is transcendental. Language itself does not belong to a particular age. Language itself does not belong to a particular class or a particular gender or a particular age. We believe that, like soul, language itself is a transcendental apparatus which we human beings use at will. This is a very seriously contested view. While talking about structuralism, we also talked about how language itself is structured in a particular way, which is basically determined by the various differences that make different units of that particular language. So language itself is something which belongs to a particular period. Language is not even something which you can completely depend upon as the so-called autonomous beings, right? This kind of a view is, as we talked in our classes, liberal humanist in approach. What do we mean by that? Because you always want to believe that language is something which you can use at will, and you can make your consciousness known to others through the use of this objective tool called language. But after we came to know about the basic principles of structuralism, we also were driven to conclude that language is not an objective tool which you can use at will. No. Now here is a very important question. What is that question? The question is this: as a woman, do you use language differently from the way men use it? And would it be possible for me to make out, when I see your writing, whether it has been written by a man or a woman? Some of the French feminists, they coined this expression, especially Ellen Six, Julia Kristeva, others, they use this expression, a creature feminine, that is feminine writing. What do they mean by feminine writing? They believe that there is a language which is exclusively feminine. See, it is like this. It is possible for us to find out the gender of a skeleton. You know this. The person may have been dead for a long time, but when you look at the skeleton, you can always make out whether once it was a man or a woman. Right. There is no way it can escape this kind of a discovery. Then, how is that possible? Because there are certain markers, what we call certain markers on a skeleton, which make that body exclusively female. Similarly, when you conduct certain medical tests, you know, looking at the samples, you can make out whether these samples have been taken either from a man or a woman. So if this is possible, then why it is not possible for us to make out whether a particular text, cultural text, it could be a poem, it could be a novel, it could be an essay, it could be an advertisement, it could be a movie, it could be anything, whether it has been produced by a man or a woman. French feminists, many of them, especially these psycho-analytical feminists, believe that there is something called a creature feminine, that is female writing. Put it very simply, but it does not simply mean that you are a woman and you produce, whatever you produce becomes a creature feminine. No, that is not what they mean. What they mean by that is, when you produce something, the very fact that you are a woman or a man influences that particular text beyond, remember, any shadow of doubt as to who is producing it. Say, for example, Marxists believe this. Marxists believe that you can always make out the class to which the producer of a text belongs, whether is a member of proletariat or a member of ruling class or member of bourgeois, right? Because you find these telltale signs of the writers, the producers, class or gender all over the text. All over the text. You got it? So now the question is this. Let us put it in simple terms. How you make out whether something has been produced by a woman writer or a male writer. Remember this. Many of feminists believe in biological determinism, especially these French feminists, which we also believe is a part of their deep belief in essentialism. Essentialism, right? What do we mean by essentialism? It is something, the belief that you are determined. You are born determined. There is no way you can change yourselves. Does not really matter what you choose to do. Ultimately, yourself will remain the same. That's why it is called essentialism. Many of these French feminists believe in biological determinism. What is this biological determinism? What makes you a woman? What makes you a woman in biological terms? A woman is a woman because she has this intrinsic ability to give birth or bear children. And there are natural biological processes like menstruation, lactation, which make women what they are. So there is no way, remember, you can argue that you are free from these things. You are free from these things. No, these are natural biological factors. Similarly, they believe that since you are a woman, you are different. And as a different human being, you produce cultural texts which are very radically different from the ones which are produced by the members of the other sex. The members of other sex. Because that's why we call it biologically marked texts. Biologically marked texts. Now, try to understand this. Do not be under the impression that all feminists believe in this. No. There are a few schools of feminism which have strong faith in biological determinism. They also talk not about equality, they talk about difference. We are women, we are singularly different. So, what makes us different? Because we have all these biological processes, remember, shaping us, determining our regular activities. So, we are women. So, the very fact that we are women also goes into the making of a cultural texts, which are radically different. Many of Anglo-American feminists do not agree with this view, right? They are at odds with this view. They don't believe in biological determinism. Many of them do not even believe in the concept of a creature feminine, right? A creature feminine. Why? Because for them, remember, it is a very crude form of essentialism. And this crude form of essentialism is always self-defeating. So what Elaine Showalter is talking about here? Elaine Showalter is, we have been reading literature for a long time. Remember, women have been reading literature as long as men have been reading literature, right? Perhaps not in the same extent, because more men have been, because of number of other factors, more men have been reading. But even then, there has been a constant engagement by women with literature. Right? You have had great readers and great writers. Now, here is a question. How have you been reading the text? So it is like this. I'm an Indian, and I also belong to a particular period, and also I come from a particular region. How I read Shakespeare is determined by the very fact that I'm an Indian, and as such, remember, once we were all subjects of the British Raj, and also we are aware of the kind of humiliation we were constantly subjected to. So having said this, we must also say that my reading of Shakespeare is certainly unique in the sense that it is not same as the way an Englishman reads Shakespeare. You cannot expect an Englishman to read Shakespeare the way I read Shakespeare. You know why it is so. I don't have to explain it to you. It is self-explanatory. Because an Englishman is an Englishman. He is reading a great poet who is from his own cultural background and society, and there are a number of other factors involved, right? Number of other factors involved. So remember this. Now we have been reading literary texts for a long time, and the question is, sometimes you are unaware of the fact that you are reading a literary text like a man. You take it for granted that there is a universal way of reading a text, universal way of understanding a text. Right? You know, problem is that this is what Elaine Showalter talks about. Lot of women end up becoming oblivious of the fact that they are women. They start writing and reading like men because they believe that That is the normal way of reading or writing. That is why she says, the problem comes from the fact that you have this poetics, which is basically androcentric, male-centered, which we have become, both men and women, unconsciously part of. We have become an unconscious part of this process, and we believe that it is normal, it is acceptable, it is remember, universal to write and read in the way prescribed by this prevailing brand of poetics, right? Now, so this is what she is questioning. What she is trying to question is this: when you read Dickens or Hardy, do you read it as a man or a woman? The fact that you are a man or the fact that you are a woman, does it have anything to do with the way you read the text? Does it have anything to do with the way you read meanings into that particular text? You understand that text? Now, this is where you have a serious problem. She argues that if you read the way, if as a woman, if you read a text the way a man reads that particular text, then you are misreading it. You are misreading it. What do we mean by that? What do we mean by that? We are reading it. We are reading it the way, remember, just a second. Yeah. You are reading it the way, remember, men read it. So you may ask this question, what is wrong with it? You read the way men read because of two things. You have been trained to read by your teachers, by your parents, by your society, the way you actually read, without realizing that that way of reading is once again partial. It is a particular method of reading developed by a particular class in its own interest, or a particular gender in its own interest, right? So always remember this. There cannot be one way of reading which is good for every one of us, irrespective of your class, irrespective of your gender, irrespective of your ethnicity, your race, right? There are number of other factors. Right. Now, look at what she has to say. She realizes this. Now, we women are simply groping in dark. We do not know what we are doing. vis-a-vis literature. We do not know what kind of texts we are reading, how we are reading them, what kind of texts we are producing, and how we are producing them. In what way, remember, our writing is different from that of men. What way our interpretations of either Shakespeare or Milton are different from, remember, the interpretation of these writers by male critics. Right? So there is a need. What is this need? Need for developing a particular poetics for women's writing. How women should write and how they should read. You will understand it as you go on. Now try to understand this. This is easier said than done. Right. Why she feels the need for it? Because she realizes this. Women continue to make mistakes as readers and writers in the absence of a specific poetics for women's literary experiences. Right. It's like this. Poetics, remember, it deals with what is good poetry, what is bad poetry, what is good literature, what is bad literature, right? And what to expect of what is it made of, right? And what are the forms or the genres, and how these genres are different from one another, right? There are a number of other factors. So when poetics deals with what is literature, questions like what is literature, what is poetry, what is fiction, or we talked about Alankar as well, dealing with art experience. Now, how women's literary experiences need poetics of their own, right? She feels that there is no separate set of theories for, see, because actually this essay was written in late 70s, right? So it's nearly 45, 50 years old, right? Ever since there has been a glut of feminist theories, right? Literary theories. But at this point, at that particular point, remember, there was nothing substantial body of feminist literary theory. So that's why, in the absence of it, she is talking about the need for producing feminist poetics. What do we mean by feminist? First, remember, there are no concrete, substantial theories which are specific to women's experiences. Women's ontological experiences, women's existential experiences, and women's cultural experiences. That is the first factor. The second factor is how women do not trust theories. They have this great mistrust. She talks. Why? Why? Women have always stayed away from theory because they believe that all theories, in essence, are androcentric. Even feminist theories are androcentric. The very fact that you study something as theory makes you prone to this androcentric patriarchal assault. So they have very methodically stayed away from theories. Now, she talks about some of these requirements, right? For feminist theory, feminist literary theory, that's what she means. What is woman's writing? What is women's writing? What is the definition for women's writing? You cannot simply say whatever is written by women is women's writing. No. That answer begs the question. Then you have this question. Who is a woman? Who is a woman? So everybody who is not a man is a woman. It's a very simple answer you are likely to come at with. If you are not a man, then you are a woman. No. These questions cannot be this simple. You need something more substantial, more profound than this. What makes writing either exclusively female or male? I'm using female, right? First, I'm just breaking that particular order, male, female, using this female first, because that is what most of feminists choose to do. Remember this. So, are all of you awake? Hello? Are all of you awake?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
That's what I wanted to. But, so, let us go to this. See, now we need feminist theory and feminist criticism. What do we mean by feminist criticism? I am reading male writer. I am reading female writers, both of them. Then what am I doing? I am employing the standards and the norms which have been handed over to me by patriarchy. Men have taught me these things. Even when women really teach you, it is men who are teaching you. Your mother. It is your father who is teaching you through your mother. So ultimately, you end up learning or acquiring and even internalizing patriarchal values. So now, what she says is this: feminist theory, literary theory, never forget that. Feminist criticism needs to be constructed on the literary norms which are specific to women's experiences. You are going to discard some of these canonical male critics. You are going to bypass Aristotle, Longinus. You are going to bypass Samuel Johnson, Matthew Arnold, I.A. Richards, all of them have been good critics, but they have been male critics. The very fact that, remember, they were the products of patriarchy makes their understanding of literature partial. Not that they were not sincere, they were very sincere. But the system which produced them itself was biased, right, or partial in its worldview, so-called worldview. What you need is that you have to keep looking for women writers, women critics, and if there are any legendary women writers, and drawing upon their experiences, drawing upon what they have produced so far, you have to construct a new form of poetics which is exclusively female. Exclusively female. So she talks about two different varieties, right? Now, woman as a reader. First, woman as a reader. What is this woman as a reader? How do you read as a woman? If you read a particular text the way men read it, then you are not reading it as a woman. Your teacher has taught you to read it like this. Your parents have taught you to read it in a particular way. You read it that particular way and find that there is something lacking in this process of reading. You know what you are reading is not right because you also know that the kind of conclusions you draw are not true to your experiences as a woman. But you are being told very often, frequently, through various means, that this is how you should read. You have been taught to like certain texts, and you have been taught to dislike certain texts. You have been told that certain texts are classics, and you have been told that certain texts are obnoxious, obscene, socially unacceptable. Now, nobody ever asked you how you reserve the right to draw your own conclusions. How some of these patriarchal canons of studying literature have become part of your consciousness as women. Because somebody says, oh, if you want to be a good student of literature, you should learn to love Shakespeare. And very often you find that you do not find some of the texts by Shakespeare very fascinating. Then you ask yourselves this question. Why? You believe that unless you learn to love Shakespeare, unless you learn to appreciate Shakespeare, you are not a good reader. So what you do for a period of time, you keep telling yourselves to like Shakespeare, these canonical texts, what we call canonical texts, not because you like them, because you have been told that it is healthy and normal for you to like them. In order to be normal, you got to love them. You have to accept their canonical status. So, how do you read as a woman? That is first one. Especially, how do you read men's texts and how do you read women's texts? Right. Now, when you read Shakespeare or when you read Victorian novels, if you are a woman, you do not want to look at the novels of Victorian age the way men would read them. You want to find out how there are very few women characters in them and how all these women characters are almost the same, in the sense that there is very little they do as individuals. It's like, remember, the heroines from your indie movies. They do not do anything substantial. They are simply present. Very often they have the same names in more than a couple of movies. Women do not do anything. They are passively present, and it is the heroes, remember, who are the actors. Actors in the sense that those who really act, who from whom actually action originates, right? And they are the centers. They are the centers around which the rest of the movie revolves. Now, you have these stereotypical portrayal of women characters. See, you always see these women characters doing things which men have always told you to do. If you meet these women characters in Victorian novels, either they are virgins waiting to be married or very good wives, or those who have failed to be either of them. But there are not many characters as such. There is no variety in characterization. It is what we call stereotyping. You know the meaning of stereotyping. You see a man or a woman from a particular religion and immediately you brand him or her as such and such a thing. You always, that is what is called stereotyping. Now, right. So there is a second variety which deals with how you write as a woman. First one is how you read as a woman, how you write as a woman. I've already told you, if you write as a woman, the way one would write as a man, then it has to be assumed that you are being untrue to your own experiences. You are not being your own self. She gives a number of examples. In 18th century, late 18th century, even mid 19th century, there were plenty of women writers who used male pseudonyms, right? They wrote under the male names. What did they do? They wrote the same way their contemporary men wrote. The reader had no way of knowing these novels had been produced by women writers disguising as men. Why? Because they would write the same way men wrote. What do we mean by that? See, they used same patriarchal language, right? Male dominated kind of a society and its worldview subscribed to. There was no way you can suspect there either gender or sex. There was no way. So she is saying, second variety is how you write as a woman. How you write as a woman. Now, she says, feminist critique, not critic, critique, is essentially political and polemical. It is political. What do we mean by that? It is not simply, remember, it is not about literature. It is not about culture. It is not about how you read or produce cultural text. It is more about, remember, how you realize that you are misrepresented as women by patriarchy. How there is a great gap in how you understand yourselves and how actually patriarchy has perceived you. There is a wide gap. You become aware of it. You become aware of it. It is also about how actually women represent themselves through their cultural texts. How do they see themselves? Whether they see themselves as being inseparably riveted to men and their causes, or their causes as individuals with their own personality. Right. So, very important is there is particular word she uses. Kaino. Kaino. Kaino means woman. Very simple. Kaino. Woman-centered criticism. Kaino critics means woman-centered criticism. How you read and write from a perspective which originates from the centrality of a woman's self. Centrality of woman's self. Gynocritics. Gynocritics. Remember that. So, now she takes an example. Thomas Hardy's novel, Mayor of Leicester. I do not know how many of you have read the novel. The novel begins with a very gloomy scene where a man by name Yanchar, who is a drunkard, has no money to buy liquor. What he does is, while passing before a public house is what you call pub, right, or bar. Public house, he, because of money, sells his
wife.
His daughter. This is how the novel begins. Hanchar sells his wife and daughter in a public house because he has no money left to buy alcohol. Let's not go into the story. But one of the critics, she quotes him, one of the critics says, a male critic of course, says, oh, see, this is a wonderful experience for every man. Being able to conveniently get rid of his wife and daughter. Right? This is every man's dream. Every man's dream. Every man has this dream. This is, remember, how a man's emancipation comes about. Right? This is how man gets his freedom. How he is, remember, how he separates himself from this baggage. Right. And let us look at it this way. Hardy is certainly a very serious writer, and he does not deserve this kind of a reading. The critic is making a mistake. That is not exactly what Hardy is trying to say in this particular novel. But still, the critic comes out with this kind of interpretation. What do you call this interpretation? It is, of course, androcentric interpretation, reading. Because if you were a woman, you would not have the same views about this particular scene or incident. You would talk about the woman, you would talk about the girl child, both of whom have been sold. You would talk about their misery. You would talk about the misery of being married to a drunkard. Right? Now, there is certainly a great difference the way, remember, you read as a man and you read as a. Now, that's why she gives this concrete example. One particular scene and reading of it by a male critic is likely to be radically different from how a woman critic would have read it. If, as a woman writer or as a woman critic, you produce the same kind of reading, then it would have to be concluded that you have unknowingly internalized male values, patriarchal values. You, without knowing, have begun to think like men. Because how this kind of a thinking enters your consciousness and how also it becomes part of your unconscious is very difficult to ascertain. So this is where she gives a concrete example, right? So uh, if we study stereotypes of women, the sexism of male critics, and the limited roles women play in literary history, we are not learning what women have felt and experienced, but only what men have thought women should be. In some fields of specialization, this may require a long apprenticeship to the male theoretician, whether he be Althusser, Potts, or Lacan. Right. Now, this is not enough. Why this is not enough? Because first important thing is this. You know, in the poem, the second coming, Yeats uses this expression, spiritus mundi. Spiritus mundi is like a reservoir or repository of collective wisdom, right? Wisdom, which is a result of all human experiences accumulated over centuries, right? Which he calls, there is this expression, spiritus mundi. Spiritus mundi. Now, she believes, Ellen Showalter believes that many of the experiences of women, or most of the experiences of women, have been systematically excluded from entering the main course of human consciousness, meaning your political institutions, your social institutions, organizations, your body of knowledge, whatever you value in your society has come into existence without, remember, including women's experiences. Women's experiences. They have been constructed exclusively on male experiences. And this is what is very dangerous about, remember, believing in a universal worldview, a collective consciousness, an idea of, remember, the existence of common sense. Now, look at it. Look at this. I'll leave reference to this. Gynocritics. I'll just talk about gynocritics. This is an expression used coined by Elaine Showalter. Gynocriticism or critics is a poetics of poetics, which is different from androcentric poetics. Aristotle is androcentric, Longinus is androcentric. All other critics are androcentric. And now you need poetics which has its origin elsewhere, and where you have the root of this new poetics in women's exclusive experiences. Women's exclusive experience. What are these women's exclusive experiences? There are a number of them, and men have not been privy to them. And more importantly, remember, men have always chosen to exclude these experiences from becoming part of this world, becoming part of this world. Right? So there is need for you to start looking for the experiences of women who have lived from the beginning of this, the beginning of the world itself. Now, because remember, whenever we look at this world, we seem to immediately realize that this is a world which is partial, because this is a world which has been made without including women's experiences, their consciousness, and their involvement. Right? So she says, what you need is, what do you know about your grandmothers? What do you know about your great-grandmothers? What do you know about women who lived 500 years ago? Say you read about all these great male leaders, kings, right? Their children, their children, their... Now, what women were doing 500 years ago, what kind of experiences they had 1,000 years ago, what women did. Men fought, of course. It seems that men have been fighting ever since this world began. But what women have been doing all these years? What did they do? You know what your mothers do. You may know a little bit about what your grandmothers did, or what your grandmother, what your great female ancestors did 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. What did they eat? How did they entertain themselves? How did they forge affinity with other members, other female members of the society? Right? We hardly seem to know anything about these experiences. That's why she says there is a need for, remember, trying to know more about your female ancestors. What did they eat? Right? Did they really read anything? What did they talk about? What did they gossip about, if they ever gossiped? Right? And what did they believe in? How did they understand their world? So when you read a text 500 years old, you have been talking about, remember, the dominant discourses of the period. But what were the dominant discourses among women? What were the issues that concerned women? And what kind of experiences women had? And how these experiences shaped their consciousness and unconscious. Now, if you need to construct gynocritics, then you need to retrieve or recover these experiences. These experiences, their wisdom, their knowledge, all of them have long been lost. Now, your criticism, the kind of a criticism, feminist criticism you want to produce, is going to be based on it. Based not only on your experiences as woman, but also your mother's experiences, the great grandmother's experiences, all the women, and various things they got engaged in. What did they believe in? We will start. Yesterday, we talked about the important points about Toward a Feminist Poetics by Elaine Showalter. It's a groundbreaking essay because in this essay she introduced the idea of gynocriticism in 1979 when it was first published. And in the beginning of the essay, she makes a couple of points. The first point she wants to make is this: women have always allowed themselves to be influenced by male aesthetic and poetic standards. If you are very particular about reading as women and writing as women, then you must give it up. You cannot continue to have the same set of aesthetic values which men have been using for such a long time in their own interest. There is no reason to believe that what is good for men is also good for women. She makes it very clear that if women were to call a particular niche for themselves as writers, then they must start with inventing new form of poetics. And how to do that, how to go about doing that? She suggests a number of points. First thing is this: there can be two ways in which you approach literature as a woman. One as a reader, the other as a writer. Both of them are closely related. When you are reading as a woman, and when you are reading male texts, the text produced by men, then you certainly need your own set of values, the ones which you have constructed over a period of time based on the experiences of your great grandmothers, mothers, right? Their exclusive experiences, not the experiences which have shaped androcentric aesthetics and androcentric poetics. So women need poetics of their own. Women need aesthetics of their own, because that is when you will come to know that what it means to be a reader as a woman, and what it means to be a writer as a woman. So with reference to this particular requirement, that she comes out with this idea of gynocratics, which is actually a rough translation of a French expression. What she is trying to do is this: you need to have a different perspective on looking at writing as a cultural practice. Cultural practice which has a wide range of influence and also a range of implications. Now, how she intends to go about doing it? First, she says, what you need to do is recover women's histories, because history of women or histories of women have been very systematically erased. The kind of a society we have, the kind of institutions we have, including the kind of practices, cultural categories like art and literature, all of them have been constructed exclusively on the basis of male experiences. In order to be free from this, in order to be able to free yourselves from this, you need to start somewhere. And where are you going to start? The first thing you need to do is to start looking for the experiences which are exclusively that of women. How women led their lives over centuries, how they looked at this world, how they experienced this world, what are their existential experiences, how they built relationships with other women, how they constructed their own inner world, how they came to understand this world and their own world, what kind of a philosophy they always chose to subsist on? What kind of a understanding of their relationship with other women they always wanted to cherish? There are a number of other factors. So how do you go about recovering or retrieving these experiences, which are exclusively female? She gives out a number of solutions. We are not going to talk about them, but always keep this in mind. Gynocritics is basically about, remember, how do you read as a woman with your own set of aesthetic and poetic values, which are not exclusively, which are not in any way male. The values of gynocritics, the kind of standards on which she hopes to build this poetics, are in no way influenced by patriarchal values, because patriarchy has made inroads into all walks of life. Your aesthetics is influenced by it. Your understanding of your own self is influenced by it. Your responses to this world are shaped by the influence of patriarchy and patriarchal values. So first thing is, even when you read a male text, you read it as a woman. And there is no reason for you to believe that the best way to read a male text is to read according to the prescription given to you by patriarchal aesthetics. You need a different set, and what kind of that you need to get. You have to be able to relate your own experiences to the experiences of your grandmothers, experiences of your female predecessors. That is where you start. And when you are writing as a woman, of course, you have to set your own standards. You should never allow yourselves to be allowed by or influenced by your male predecessors. You need to have your own view about everything in this world. You need to have your own philosophy. You need to have your own line of thinking. All of it should never be influenced by androcentric worldview. Right. So gynocriticism assumes that it is possible to cut off your relationship with the kind of intellectual world you have long been living in. Because in order to be able to, a good practitioner of gynocritics, you need to have a kind of an intellectual divorce with the male intellectual world, which will have to come about sooner or later if you want to become a good feminist. Because there has to be this realization on the part of all women that what kind of life you have been living, what kind of thoughts you have been producing, what kind of ideas you have been harboring in your mind, all of them are result of the internalization of patriarchal values. So what you need to do is start unlearning. Start unlearning. start detoxing yourselves, right? You have been constantly poisoned by, your minds have constantly been poisoned by this patriarchal thoughts, right? Androcentric rather. Now, that's the first part of it, which we talked about yesterday. The second part of it is this. She comes out with a number of examples. How do you retrieve? How do you retrieve women's experiences? There are plenty of women's experiences which our collective consciousness, which is of course a misnomer because it does not include women and their thinking and their consciousness, but in spite of all that, remember, it has been oblivious of. So collective consciousness, what we call collective consciousness, has never been inclusive. Our history has always been impermeable to women's experiences. It has been shut down to women and their experiences. So how do you come out of this kind of a prison as women? Where do you start? Allowing yourselves to integrate with this kind of knowledge and wisdom from which you have long been kept. So she gives a few examples, but she takes a couple of examples from 19th century writing. The first example is that of Barrett Browning. All of you have heard of Browning, right? All of you have heard of this poet, 19th century poet Browning. Browning was an accomplished poet. We read about Browning. We read about his achievements. But we always tend to forget the kind of sacrifices his wife Barrett Browning made in order to allow her husband to become an established and accomplished writer, poet. So what you need to do, let us go to examine the kind of a life Barrett Browning led. Look at her letters. Look at the letters. Because how women communicated with one another in the 19th century. Men communicated with one another, at least in England, in public houses, in pubs, in hotels, in restaurants, right? There were number of platforms available for them, number of avenues were available for them. What about women? How did they communicate with one another? What kind of idiom they used? And how they shared their experiences with one another. You cannot go to mainstream media, which was mainstream media in 19th century, and find out more about this kind of exchange of personal feelings and emotions among women. It is not available. It is not easily available. Then where is it available? Where do you have to look for them? The first thing you have to do is to look at the kind of letters women of the 19th century wrote to one another. So what she does is she looks at the letters written by Barrett Browning to her friend, where she constantly talks about, remember, her responsibilities, especially her responsibility as a wife, as a mother. And she is also a wonderful writer. But she always seems to encounter this particular conflict between her responsibility as a wife and her desire to write. And she always sacrifices the latter because her husband is also a practicing writer, and perhaps actually she is a better writer, but she never wants to say that she is a better writer than her husband. And very often, remember, in a few letters, she has made it very clear that she allowed her husband to go ahead and publish. She gave him all the necessary help he required in order to write and publish. And she always put her own interests below the interests of her husband. She always prioritized her husband's interests. Why did she do that? Because she had been brought up on these values which constantly told her that her primary responsibility was to be a good wife, not to be a good writer, good poet. But the same values did not let her husband know that his primary responsibility was to be a good husband. Because for men, the primary responsibility or the primary objective is to be either a good poet or a good engineer or a good doctor. But for women, remember, it's always this responsibility of being a good wife. So, this is one of the examples she gives. How women sacrifice their own interests in favor of the male members of their family. It could be their father, it could be their husbands, it could be their sons, right? So what you need to do is now look at this particular part of women's history which has long been hidden from us. Look at the number of writers who lived and wrote in the mid and late 19th century. There are plenty of women writers who wrote extensively, who never became famous because remember, the process of canonization, the process of producing literary canons never included them. So in order to be able to be accepted as a writer, you had to write not only as a man, you had to be a man in fact. And I gave you the examples of Eliot, George Eliot and others. And the prevailing aesthetic standards of the day did not allow women's experience to influence them. And how many women were privy, had access to men's experiences in those days. Right. So if you did not write about men's experiences, which they called universal experiences, the experiences of entire humankind, there was no way that kind of a writing was going to be accepted as good writing. Right. So she takes a number of examples just look at this. Our womanly love, the conflict between our womanly love and ambition for our husband and our conflicting commitment to our own work. So she is being called upon to prioritize her responsibilities, and the first responsibility she has been told to attach the most important importance to is that of a wife, and that is what she does. And she writes in one of those letters to her friend, at the end of the letter, she is writing something very interesting. She is writing something very interesting, and when she's about to finish her piece of work, she realizes that her husband is also finishing his work, and it would not be a good idea for both of them to publish their works simultaneously. If her work proved to be a better one, then it would be a humiliation for her husband. So what she does write in that letter is, I'm finishing, and even if I finish it, I may not publish it. I do not want that to happen along with that of my husband. She adds, Riley, if mine were ready, my work were ready, I might not say, so perhaps even my work gets ready by then, I may not announce it to the world that my work is ready. Right? So this is it. Now, here is one more reference made to Nightingale, Florence Nightingale. What Ellen Showalter wants to prove is this. Middle class women, bourgeois women are this particular class of women who, remember, are absolutely complacent and happy with their condition. They are happy with what they have got, scared of breaking away from tradition, scared of antagonizing patriarchy, right? And they are happy with, remember, whatever you give them. You give them a good television, they would be happy. You give them a good refrigerator, they would be happy. A few jewels will make them happy. That's why the problem with middle class women is this. Their pain has been taken away. Right? They lead a drugged life. They have been seduced by material wealth. So when you take away their pain, when you drug them, what they do is they become forgetful of their real pains, the real nature of the world they live in, the real nature of their oppressed existence. Look at what Florence Nightingale has to say about this. Give us back our suffering, she says. Give us back our suffering. See, it's like a public distribution system. Why do you have public distribution system in all these so-called, liberal democracies? You have this PDS system so that people will never revolt against the establishment. You keep them alive. You keep them alive. And also you keep them from starving to death, but you never give them enough to be rich. So it's a mere subsistence. Mere subsistence. So that is the kind of a condition in which women are kept. That's why she says, no, that is very bad. You take away all these things from these men, the working class men or middle class women. Give them their original pain. Then only remember they will be stung to action. So give us back our suffering. We cry to heaven to in our hearts, suffering rather than indifferentism. Indifferentism. For out of suffering may come the cure. So if you continue to suffer, if you feel the pain, if you feel that kind of agony of, remember, being exploited, just walk out of your drugged state. Then you will realize what you really need. So cure can come out only when you experience the pain. You will try to find out a permanent cure for your pain. Better to have pain, paralysis. Better to have pain than paralysis. No paralysis. This is the state of paralysis. So we are all paralyzed, emotionally paralyzed, right? Intellectually paralyzed. Somebody else thinks for us, somebody else feels for us, somebody else makes decisions for us. We live like zombies. So as long as women continue to live in this kind of a state, remember, they continue to be prisoners of their own making. So Florence Nightingale asks for it, and also she talks about a number of other experiences. Say, there is a wonderful poem by Adrienne Rich. The poem itself is titled Song. She quotes it. It must be the loneliness of waking first, of breathing. Dawn's first cold breathe on the city, of being the one awake in a house wrapped in sleep. You know, women are always the first to wake up in the house, right? Start preparing the things and cleaning the household, all those things. Now, look at this. You cannot expect a man to write this kind of a poem because he doesn't know what it means to wake up first in the morning when everybody else is asleep. So she says, this is what we need to talk about. First, experiences which are exclusive to women, and experiences from your own perspective, not the way men would have felt, men would have understood, men would have interpreted. You must try to just rethink about the way you have been experiencing this life. Oh, hold on a second. Right. Oh. So there was another serious problem with women writers in the 19th century. The problem was that of getting their works published. There were no publishers available for women writers. They never wanted to publish the works produced by women. How did they solve that problem? So while trying to reconstruct the history of women, she also tries to talk about how actually women have been trying to establish themselves as writers. The kind of experiences they encountered on their way to becoming writers, the kind of obstacles they faced, and how they managed to overcome them. Right. There were a number of ways in which, remember, they tried to overcome the obstacles, especially that of getting their works published. Some of them wrote using male pseudonyms, you know that. And some women writers decided to establish their own publishing houses, and they established their own publishing houses and started publishing the works written by women. That was one way of solving that, right? So what you need to do is first try to find out not only how women have lived their lives over centuries, but also how women have been writing over centuries, and how women have been reading over centuries. What have been their most favorite forms of reading, how they have been reading. There is no reason for you to believe that all women have been reading the way they have been told to read by men. They must have found certain ways of bypassing this kind of oppressive mode of living and oppressive mode of trying to come to terms with the world they lived in. So how that is one aspect of the problem. First thing that you need to do is first establish your own way of looking at literature. What it means to be a producer of a cultural text as a man. So men have always tried to answer that question. Why have we been representing ourselves through cultural texts? There are a number of answers available. But do women believe in that? The kind of answers men have found, are they good for women as well? Or do women need different answers? Do they really feel that they need different answers for these questions? So that is one aspect of this problem. What she tries to do is, say, you have been studying English literature for quite some time, history of English literature. You are familiar with certain phases in the history of English literature, certain movements, certain schools, certain writers, established writers, canonical writers. And if I asked you to name a few writers from the 16th century Elizabethan period, then he certainly will name Shakespeare and a number of other prominent writers of the period. Were there no other writers? You are aware of Shakespeare and his contemporaries, male contemporaries. But what about other writers who lived and wrote but did not make into the history books recording the literary history of the period? Because when you read a literary history of English literary century literature, you find that a lot of women writers did not make into history. They were there, very much alive, writing, publishing in volumes. But a history of English literature did not include them. It was blind to them. It refused to see them. Why it refused to see them? Because whoever was responsible for forming these canons, literary canons, they did not consider them fit enough to be part of this literary history, because they thought that that kind of a writing was no great writing, right? It was not on par with the great writers like the writing of great writers like Dickens or Hardy. So that was the first thing. Now what you need is, first, you have to rewrite history of literature from woman's perspective. And what you need to do, you have to go back to other women writers of 19th century, 18th century, and before that, and what kind of writing they have been producing. What have they been writing about? And how did they express that? Because if you read Oxford History of English Literature or Cambridge History of Literature, there are not many women writers. It doesn't mean that there have never been any women writers. There have been plenty of more women writers than male writers. Then what happened to all these women writers and what happened to their writing? They wrote. If you look carefully, you can find their writing. Right, it's like this. See, we talk about the people whose existence has been erased. Because when you read mainstream history, you find the people. You find people, especially people from the lower rungs of society, simply absent. When you read history of India, you know that. So if you look at this standard history books of India, you find some 50 or 100 characters in them. Did 100 people make history? Only 100 people make history? You have the names of kings and a few queens as extension of these kings. Right. Now, perhaps you may remember some 50 names from Indian history. Did these people, only these people, make history of India? And only these 50 people lived in India? How many people lived in India? So what happened to all other human beings? Similarly, remember, what happened to these women's writing? Where did it disappear? Right? How it was spirited away. So that's why she says what you need is, you have to go to your history, go back in time, excavate these dead and buried women writers and their writings, and rewrite history of literature from women's perspective. The way, remember, you would write it as a woman, right? First thing. Now, one important thing. See, this is especially with special reference to the kind of a writing they have had in England. This is specifically European. It divides women's writing into three phases. Three phases. Remember this very carefully. There is a particular reason why she. This is a very crude. This kind of a this way of looking at women's writing is a little bit crude, but it's some kind of a very tentative working classification if you need. What she does is she divides the history of women's writing in England into three linear phases. First one she calls feminine phase. Second one she calls feminist phase. The third one she calls female phase. Feminine, feminist, female. Feminine, feminist, female. First one feminine, second one feminist, third one female. The first one starts around 1840s. 1840s. And lasts for 40 years till 1880s, which she calls feminine phase. Why? This was the time when you had number of women writers writing in England. They wrote, but they wrote under male pseudonyms, because as women writers, they were not acceptable, and there was no way they could get their works published as women writers. They used male pseudonyms and wrote. And very often, remember, they wrote like men. There was no way you could make out whether it had been written by a woman or not. And they did not want to be recognized for who they were. They didn't want to be found out. But why did they write? And what was the point? They took it as a challenge. If men could do that, we too could do it. Men could write. If they write, we too can write. We too can write like them. We too can become acceptable. So it's in order to prove this kind of a intellectual equality. They took it as an intellectual. That's why many of these women writers wrote. But you must also realize that they did not write like men. They did not write like women. Meaning, there was no way you could make out these works had been produced by women. Right? The perspective, the perception, right? Outlook, the sentences, attitudes, tone, right? Imagery, everything was characteristically male. So somehow they had managed to learn and even internalize some of these things. So they managed to do it. So, but why did they do it is a question. So she says, it was a serious effort on their part to prove that they could do what men had done. They could write like men. So if men could climb mountains, scale mountains, we too can, right? It does not prove anything. It does not prove anything. If men can write the novels which run to 500, 600 pages, we too can. You know, George Eliot's Middlemarch, that bulky novel. So if men can do that, we can do. But the problem was that they chose to write. They just chose to write the way men did. Men did write. It was just a kind of an intellectual challenge, very specific, right? So 1842. So this particular phase, right? This particular phase is known as feminine phase, 1842, 1880. The second phase, feminist phase, 1880s to 1920s. First one are, remember, intellectual in nature. The second one is political. Now, women wrote as women. Women wrote as women. They did not use any masquerading. They did not use any pseudonyms. They used their own names and they produced, and they were very vocal. They were becoming assertive. They were asking for their rights. They were asking for universal suffrage, right to vote. They were asking for property rights. I have already told you that women could not own anything. So women did not inherit anything from her father. It went to the male member. Women could not go to schools, colleges. The universities did not admit them. Right? So these works, which were produced during the second phase, feminist phase, they concern themselves with these rights. Right to education, right to property, right to vote. Right? So they read about it and they wrote about it as women. So that is why we call it feminist phase. It is called feminist phase. Very political. You want equality. Political equality. How? By demanding universal franchise, suffrage, right to vote, and there were a number of works produced, and right to property, right to education. A lot of women writers produced the novels which were exclusively about right to education and the kind of faced in educating themselves, going to the schools, admitting themselves to the colleges, universities were right, were not open to them. So the second phase is known as feminist phase. The third one, which he calls female phase, which starts in 1920s. After 1920s, at least till 1970s, this particular essay was published in 1979. So he says it's still going on. What is this female phase. You don't want to prove anything. You prove that you can do what men do long ago. Right? So it has been proved beyond doubt. And you have, at least in European context, almost all the rights men have. Right? There is this kind of a political, economic equality as such. So women get the same wages or a salary men get. Of course, there are a number of uh, limitations, but still, remember exceptions, but still. Now, after 1920s, in this female phase, you try to assert your difference from men, their culture, their society, their values, their philosophy, their religion, their aesthetics, their poetics, their God, their idea of God. Why should women have the same idea of God? The kind of idea men have been cherishing. It is men's God. It's men's religion. It is men's philosophy. It's men's political system. Women are different. We are different from men. So we need different set of these categories. We need a different religion, right? These established religions are male-centric religions, right? You do not have any one of these religions originating from women. All these prophets are men. So what you want to prove now is that you are different and you are not going to measure your worth against men and their institutions. In comparison to men's institution values. So you are going to have a world. This is what she calls female phase, right? Female phase. Women reject in the third phase. What is the third phase? Female phase. Women reject both imitation, because first phase, which we call feminine phase, is the phase of imitation. You wrote like men. You wrote like men. Right? You produce the same kind of literature, same poems. Right? Imitation. The second one, which is feminist phase, is protest. You protest. Your writing is protest literature. You are writing to the existing political establishment, the political organizations. You are writing against the prevailing social conditions. Right? The third one is basically, remember, different, because it does not believe either in imitation, which women indulged in the first phase, imitation. The second one, protest. So the third one is experience as the source of an autonomous art, extending the feminist analysis of culture to the forms and techniques of literature. Representatives of the formal female aesthetic, such as Dorothy Richardson and Virginia Woolf, begin to think in terms of male and female sentences and divide their work into masculine journalism and feminine fiction. Right? What women writers did in the third phase, what they have been doing in the third phase, is to establish their difference from men, assert their difference, assert their singularity, uniqueness. Okay. This is what the third phase has always been about, which she calls female phase. Right. So the points which I have, see, we can go on and on. We have made so far are enough for your examination. Just focus on them, especially these three phases. They would be immense help.